There we go. Happy days. Working well. Off you go.
Perfect. Okay, great. So welcome everybody. My name is Guy Thomas and I'm the Director of Safety for DAN Europe. And this evening we'll talk about the Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment project and the Diving Safety Officer course. Let's start. Okay, so before we actually go into the real deal, I would like to introduce or talk about two accidents that happened in the last 2 months. It's already rather well. One of them is rather fresh, and I would like to take you to the Maldives for a second. Now, the Maldives is a very nice diving destination. You might have been there yourself. It is composed of different islands, atolls, and it is extended over a good amount of kilometers. And there are some hyperbaric chambers in the region. I believe that we have four at the moment operational in the Maldives, but none of them are actually in the deep south. So if you look at the map on the screen, you can see the deep south where it say Adu Atoll, which is falling off the screen almost. That in that area, unfortunately, there's no chamber, and in that area, unfortunately, sometimes we have diving emergencies because it's a rather nice location. So people they start in Male, the capital, they take a boat or a diving cruise, and they'll go all to the south to enjoy fantastic diving in that region. Now, the problem is if there is a diving accident, as we had a few weeks ago. So we have to deal with a dive accident in such a remote location. It's a remote location within a remote area almost. And getting a person from that liveaboard to the closest by hyperbaric chamber, it's cumbersome. It is problematic. It gives us a headache. It is an area where we couldn't really count on transport by boats because it being too far, and transportation by airplanes was problematic. It just like 2 weeks ago, something changed that the local government is now offering a kind of an air evacuation service, but before this it wasn't there. So we had to count or work with commercial airlines. Now if you have an injured diver that is not in the best condition, that a lot of these airlines they refuse to be transported, because if this person would die on board, they would all of a sudden have to face some liability issues. So we need the help of the people on the boats, of the crew, and we ask these people to provide oxygen to the diver. But I guess that everybody of us know that the importance of giving oxygen as soon as possible after a dive accident. So what happens here is they start providing oxygen to that diver. There is no fast availability of transportation to the dive, the hyperbaric chamber. So it will take some time. So we ask the person to provide oxygen for as long as possible, a minimum 4 hours. And we're following up every hour, every half an hour, every hour to see how these signs and symptoms are developing. Now, almost after this, on the first call, there was already confusion by the dive operator. A dive operator gave us a location which is in reality close to a hyperbaric chamber. And then on our second call with the dive operator, when we asked them, could you give us your coordinates, because we can't understand exactly where you are, we actually found out that they were absolutely not where they told us before. They're completely in the deep south. When we asked them to provide oxygen, in one of the next phone calls, they already complain, oh, but we do not have that much of oxygen available, and so on. Now, if I look at accidents or situations like this, then I'm kind of worried, because dive operators, they offer diving in these great destinations. But then if there is an accident, it seems that they are not really ready to deal with it. They didn't know exactly their location compared to the hyperbaric chamber. They didn't have enough oxygen on board, or better, they have enough oxygen on board. They didn't want to use it because they were afraid that then they would have no oxygen left anymore for the rest of the season, let's say. And on top of that, the girl or the lady that we talked with on the phone from the dive operator also gave us the name of two hyperbaric chambers, and we had to tell her those chambers, they are no, one of them never opened and the second one isn't available anymore since years. So I could see that there was this big problem on what to do in emergency. There was not really emergency assistance plan, and whatever they had was not updated. That's cumbersome. It's a problem. And next accident that I'd like to show you, it's not that from the last couple of months, it happened in 2019. It is a fire on board of a vessel, and unfortunately there were 39 people on board, including the crew, and 34 of them, they died. And although that it cannot be set 100% what actually caused this fire, the most probable cause of this fire was actually the charging of batteries. Now, this is not something that we automatically see as a risky business, although that we have now more and more of these boat fires, even a few weeks ago. So if I look at both of the accidents, in both situations, I understand that there were risks involved, or there were hazards present. And in the first example, the reaction or the emergency action plan was not sufficient, was not well thought of, or was not existing. And in the second one, I can't go into detail with it. We don't have the real time for it. But in the second one, even that, though that the fire was probably caused by the burning of a battery, that, well, the whole boat got on fire, there was also another issue in which the emergency exit was leading to the room in which there was a fire. So the main entrance and the emergency entrance were actually in the same room, almost the same door. And nobody ever thought about it. And this dive operator, and I'm not going to call names, he's out of business. He had to stop after the lawsuit. This dive operator was not a new dive operator. He was into business. I looked it up the other day. Let me get it. He was in business for 45 years before this accident happened. And he had that boat for 38 of the 45 years. The boat was from 81. The accident happened in 2019. And all of the time, all over the time, so in 45 years or 38 years of operating that particular boat, they always worked the same way until that day an accident happened, and 34 people unfortunately died. So they probably were thinking they were doing a good thing because accidents didn't happen, and all of a sudden, big problem. So now, just these accidents were just a small introduction, but then let's now just try to understand what actually clients expect when they go diving or when they are selecting the dive operator. Well, first thing that we need to understand, when you go on a holiday as a client, you don't expect accidents to happen. You do expect, though, that the dive operator is prepared. So you all kind of want to understand, or you would like that also the dive operator understands all the risks that are involved, because maybe the client itself wouldn't know the risk involved with the dive operation they are choosing. And in one way or the other, this dive operator needs to understand how safe that dive operator actually is. And this is not easy. It is not easy for us to understand if a dive operator works in a safe way or not. How would be able to check? Now, if I look at the dive operator side, then I ask myself, but do they actually run a risk assessment? Because if I look at the accidents that I just mentioned, if they would have done a risk assessment, they would have seen certain things, and this was not done. So Okay, they didn't do a risk assessment. Did they really know how safe their operation was? Was there anything that could have been done to make their operation safer? And I'm not talking only about what happens under the water, but in general, on board, for example, in the second example. Do they have standard operational procedures and emergency plans? And sometimes when we ask it in our HIRA program, they tell us, yes, we do have it. And then I ask him, send me a standard operational procedure or an emergency plan, what you do in case of a lost diver, for example, and then people vanish because they don't have it. They do not even have the knowledge to make such a document sometimes. The biggest question is, do the dive operator knows all the risks that are involved with dive operations? And how safe are these dive operations actually? That's a big question that a dive operator should ask itself. And it's not about luck, because you have done certain things 20 years, nothing ever happened, and now an accident happened. It's not about luck. Safety and luck are two different things. So the expectations from a client might be very different towards the reality. He might expect the dive operator to be safe, but in reality, it might not be that safe. Unfortunately for the client, until today, there is no clear identification that is actually showing if a dive operator is working in a safe way. So the client says you're just going to presume that the dive center they are diving with works safely, because that's what you would expect from a professional center. And the dive operator, on the other side, he did not receive any specialized training in, for example, risk assessment. Because if you look at dive instructor education, a lot of it is focused on how you teach and how you bring a student in a safe way under the water and all that kind, very focused on what's going to happen in the water and how to teach, but not on risk assessment and on running a dive center or risk with a compressor area or risk on board or risk in a classroom or whatever. So the HIRA program we have, the Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment Program, actually is helping the owners of dive centers or operators, the staff members and professionals to identify actually hazards before they would lead to an injury or to losses. Let's take a look at the background of the HIRA program. So I guess you all know and remember that the mission of DAN is to promote diving safety and to assist divers in needs. And the strategy that we have for HIRA is to prevent injuries and to actually create a culture of safety, to make safety a habit in the dive center. And we are doing it through the use of procedures where we avoid accidents from happening, and through the use of emergency action plan that prepares us to react in case of an accident or in case of an emergency. And this is done through obviously the hazard identification and risk assessment. The principle that we are dealing with is in reality very simple. Now, first of all, the whole HIRA program starts from an educational point of view. We are trying to educate the dive center to understand and to discover the risks or the hazards better in their own dive operation. And we are encouraging them to perform self-assessments so that they have a good idea of what they can improve in their operation. And the ultimate aim, obviously, is to make diving or dive operations safer. And to do that, first of all, we have to work on awareness. And the biggest thing, the first problem is, if you want to prevent an injury, then actually you need to understand the hazards and the risks involved. If you don't understand what or can't see the hazard because you don't know, you will never be able to mitigate it. And secondly, on awareness, also how to deal with emergencies, because it's fine that you have an oxygen unit, it's fine that you have a first aid kit, but maybe something else needs to happen as well, because that's not a magic box and everything will run and everything will resolve itself. The second part of the principle is actually the preparedness. So once that you, for example, have your emergency plan, then we have to ask ourselves that, how are we going to order procedures? How are we going to train our staff? Do they know how to operate a compressor? Do they know how to operate an oxygen unit and all of this kind of stuff? Do they know what to do in case of a fire? And then we need to drill them. We need to run some emergencies. Imagine that in case of a fire, I have 2 staff members, and one of the staff members everybody has to go out to the left side, and one of them, everybody has to go out to the right side. That would create confusion. So I need to make sure that whatever standard I make or whatever emergency action plan I make, it works. So I need to use it and I need to check it with my staff members. And the third principle there is the primordial prevention of emergency situations. So we are doing that hazard identification risk assessment with continuous improvements. If we see, for example, there was a near miss, we try to analyze it. We keep all the data that we have a good idea of how safe we are working. And whatever implementation that we did, we have to check if it made a difference or not, if it made the operation more safe or maybe even less safe in the worst case. So what we are doing actually in this program is we are doing risk mitigation, and we are doing it on different levels. In the HIRA program, which some of you might know, we have 3 different levels. We make it simple: level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 1 is kind of an entry level. We require from the dive operator to have people trained in oxygen provision and first aid. Obviously, we require that they have an oxygen unit and a first aid kit available in the dive center, at the pool, at the dive sites, or on the boats. And we also require that they have some emergency actions plan and standards operational procedures, but very simple, nothing too complicated. And there is an online questionnaire where students or participants, they can participate in, and they do a self-assessment, they fill in a questionnaire, and then they can get their first level HIRA certification for their center or for themselves. And then they get invited to participate in the second level. The second level is a little bit more complicated. It's still self-assessment, but now we are asking more proof of what they are telling us. And here we already see that a lot of centers, they are not able to provide us the proof. They are not able to give us an emergency plan or a standard operational procedure. They don't have it, or they don't know how to make it. And now, this is a problem. But those who participate in level 2, they can then participate in level 3. And in level 3, we slice a dive operation into different pieces. Every piece is another area in the dive center. And then we ask the participants to identify the hazards and the risks that they have in their dive operation. And unfortunately here, almost everything stops, because most, if not to say all, so most of the dive operators, they are not able to get to that level 3 because they are not able to assess the risks or to identify the hazards that they have. There is something missing. There's something missing in the education. That's what we try to resolve with the HIRA and the DSO program. So looking to the HIRA process itself, the first thing that you do is we try to identify a hazard. Sorry, my slide was blocked there for a second. Here we are. So we try to identify a hazard, then we do a risk assessment, then whatever we find, our findings, we're going to have to mitigate to make our operation safer. Then we need a tool to make sure that whatever we implemented makes sense. So we do some measurements, and that measurement is giving us continuous feedback. And every time we have a continuous feedback, we can do a risk assessment again, because we've made a change. And again, we'll say, is our operation now safer or not, and so on and so on. I have some problems with my slides, by the way, so I hope that you see them in a good way.
Yeah, Guy, I can confirm everything is fine so far.
Okay, so when I look at the first part, the hazard identification, then as I said, we slice a dive center into different areas. So we divide the dive operation, and we will look at, for example, a rental area or a pool, or the boat dive operation, or the shore boat or the shore dive operations. We look at the compressor room in the shops and all the other areas that we have in a dive center. And this is where we start. And then we need to identify the risks that can possibly cause harm in each and every of those areas. And when we talk about these things that can possibly cause harm, sorry, then that causing harm might mean an injury. A fire would cause burns, obviously, which is a health issue, or an illness. A dive operator, a guy who's running a compressor, is losing his hearing because he didn't use any protection, and he's been doing this job since the last 10 years. Or some losses. There was an explosion from a cylinder, and now I have my dive center, which is partially broke, so I'm losing money, I'm losing part of my business. But that's all the things that we put on under the name things that can cause harm. So we identified an area, and now we have to make that risk assessment. And if to explain what the meaning of the word risk is, actually the probability that exposure to an hazard will lead to a negative consequence. Now, the hazard is any potential harmful situation or agent. The probability is the likelihood that something might go wrong. And exposure is actually coming in contact with that hazard, and the consequence is how severe or the severity of a particular outcome. And if I have to calculate my risk, then I have to take the probability times the exposures times the consequence. Now, this is complicated. It's not very complicated. We have some risk matrices that will help us in understanding how high the level of risk is in that part of the dive center or in that job that the person is doing. So how do you characterize or qualify a risk? Now, we are using, I would call it a scoring system. It's a matrix actually. And we are giving a scale, a 5-point scale, to the probability, the exposure, and the consequence. So the probability, the likelihood that an event will happen, it goes from unlikely to definite, and that gives us a score from 1 to 5. And for exposure, so the frequency of exposure to that hazard, so gives us again from 1, which is rare, to a 5, which is continuous. And the consequence is how severe it was at the end. And if it's 1, it's noticeable, but it was just a plaster and it's okay. And if it was 5, it's catastrophic. So it's an explosion or even a fatality that can happen. So in practice, how does it work? You remember that we do the probability times the exposures times the consequence. So we have the possibility to end up from 1 to 5, so 5 times 5 times 5, or 1 times 1 times 1. That's about my range. 0, it says observation, no real risk, but I mean the minimum is 1, so I should delete that 0 part. But everything below 5 is an acceptable risk. Everything between 5 and 20 is a medium risk. It means that you need to give it some attention. Everything between 20 and 50 on that score system mean that there is kind of a high risk, so it needs your urgent attention. And between 50 and 100, the risk is becoming very high. You should stop using or should stop doing what you are doing. Something must change. And when you're over 100, then you are in an extremely dangerous situation, and you should stop working the way you are working immediately. So your score could be between 1 and 125. So, but let's give some examples. It's going to be more clear. So ladders on a boat. And a ladder on a boat, what kind of injury can it cause you? The ladder can hit you in the head, of course, but you might have noticed that those ladders sometimes they are moving, and when you put your finger in that moving ladder, when the ladder goes back, it's like a nutcracker, and your finger is caught in between, and then you could even have an amputation. So it could lead to a very unpleasant situation. So the probability of, if you have a ladder like that, the probability that the likelihood of this be happening, I would say it's possible. It's surely not definite, but not also not unlikely, because the ladder is moving. The exposure or the frequency, well, I would say it is frequent. It's about one time a day. I mean, obviously more people will use it, but the ladder is used one time a day. It's not that it's constantly used. It's used while you are doing your operation, obviously. So I would say a frequent. Then the consequence. Okay, what would be the consequence of this? Well, I would call it a tree. It would be serious. If it's an amputation, it's kind of a serious. It would surely be an disruption of the work or the activity for a moment. So if I have to calculate my score, 3 times 4 times 3 is 36. And if I look at that risk matrix that we showed before, then I'm here between 20 and 50. So I have a high risk and I need some attention. That attention, we'll look at it later, how we can resolve that problem. Another example is on the surface, we can have a lost diver. And if a lost diver, if we can't find him, then it might even lead to a fatality. So again, if I look at probability, I will say, okay, we'll say it's a 3, it's possible. The exposure, I'll say it's frequent, it's a 1. So we have the same situation as before, but obviously now the consequence is going to be worse. So I'm going to go to catastrophic, the person might die. We might not find him again. So again, making my calculation, my risk score is 60. If I look at the risk matrix, then I see that I'm now at that, at that very high risk level, and I should stop working. I should implement some risk mitigation, or I should implement some changes to reduce that risk factor or that risk score. The last example, this is the skin DCS. So the compression illness, if you have it, most probably will not die, but you might need to go to a hyperbaric chamber. The probability, again, this is possible that it will happen. The exposure, it's frequent. And the consequence, I would say it is severe. You're not going to die from it most of the time. Very unlikely you're going to die from it, but it might be some severe issues. It might even lead to some paralyzation. So it's not something to just ignore. And again, if I calculate, I will go to 48. And if I look at my risk matrix, then I would see that I am at a high risk level 3. So I need some urgent attention. So in these 3 examples, we just kind of qualify the risks of our dive operation. Obviously, this is just an example. Your dive operation might be obviously be different. And then now we need to mitigate that risk. How do we mitigate risks? And first of all, we can do it by using some technical controls. And when we think about technical controls, we think about engineering. The second thing we can do is to use administrative controls. So administrative controls, we are thinking about implementation of policies and procedures. And the last one is the protection or the use of, for example, personal protection equipment. So this is what we have to mitigate risks. Let's go to the ladder example that we saw before. So if I think about the engineering, then I would say we need to redesign the ladder, maybe in a way that it doesn't move anymore, so that my finger can't get caught between it. But administrative controls, I could also implement some procedures in which I give verbal warnings to people before they come on board or before they dive. Listen, guys, you get back on board, don't put your hands there. So I'm mitigating my risk there already. And the last one was that protection. I could maybe even use some foam cushions so that when the ladder hits back, that I have some space there to avoid that it's metal on metal. So I have some foam there that protects my hands. So this is how I would mitigate this specific risk. And the second example that we did, remember that lost diver engineering, we have the use of personal location beacons or AES systems or ENOS systems, which are a kind of location devices as well. And administrative controls, head counting procedures just to make sure that we don't leave the dive site with a person that is not back from the dive yet. It happened a few years ago. I think it happened in '85 with a couple. It happened more than once, but in '85 it happened with a couple in Australia, and then Holloway made a movie out of it. So everybody probably knows this specific accidents because people didn't use those headcount procedures. And the last one, if you remember that protection, is once that I'm lost, how can I get seen again? So we think about the use of a DSMB or a rescue streamer, which kind of it's a floating foil. And if you look from a helicopter, you can easily see where the person is. Normally you see only a head, which is very small, but using that foil just from a big distance, you can already see where that missing diver is, so it's easier to get found. And then the use of a mirror, for example. So again, here we can mitigate the risk by implementing these things. The last one was that decompression sickness. This mitigation wise, engineering, we can use dive computers. And I read another article today of people who went diving with a dive center. They didn't have their own dive computers. The dive center didn't have any computers to rent them. So now this family was diving with a few people, and at the end of the day, they're all on different levels. So I mean, it's a mess. You never know how much nitrogen was there in uptake. The dive computer from the dive guide might not be for the same profile that you are doing. So what kind of real protection would it give to you? The second part, administrative controls. You can provide water to your clients. You can tell them that they should drink and stay hydrated. You could set some depth limits or longer surface intervals. You can do some administrative controls there as well. Brings us to the last one, the protection, making sure that they drink enough and maybe even use nitrox. But if you use nitrox, obviously, and then you go into the limits, that's not really going to help you. You can use nitrox and using an air table, for example, not for the depth, but for the dive time, then it would make it a little bit safer. So these are mitigation principles that we can implement. But before you can implement them, you need to understand the risk, you need to qualify the risk, and you need to know how to mitigate the risk. You need specific knowledge for all of this. And remember that once you implemented something, you're going to have to check if whatever you implemented makes sense. So you need to have a numerator, a denominator. So a numerator is, for example, the amount of accidents that you recorded in, or the injuries that you have treated, or the amount of near misses. But with that information only, it doesn't give us anything. If I tell you that one dive center had 100 incidents recorded and another dive center had 5, and I'll ask you which of the two is the safest one, you're probably going to answer me the one with the 5 because the 100 is bigger. But in order to answer, I need a denominator. I need to know 5 on what? 5 accidents on 10 days, on 10 dives, or 100 accidents on 1,000,000 dives. All of a sudden now, the one with 100 accidents is much safer than the one with the 5. So with denominator data, could be the airfills, the amount of airfills that I did, or the amount of dives, or the amount of boat launches, or the operational days of working that I was open, and then you have a good idea from the amount of accidents that are happening. And if you implement changes, don't forget the near misses. Okay, a near miss is not an accident. It's you were lucky. It could have been worse. So don't ignore them. Register them and take them in your statistics and look at them in an honest way and tell, okay, I have to change this. I need to implement some changes. So how do we start? First of all, we need to start by identifying an area of interest, for example, a compressor air room, and then we are doing our risk assessment in that specific room. we need to ask ourselves which tasks are done. So in a compressor room, one of the tasks probably is air cylinder filling. Then you need to ask yourself how it should be done. Especially when you want to write an operational procedure, you need to know how the task should be done. But also ask yourself if you have all the equipment needed to do the task in a proper way, or if whoever needs to perform that task has the needed training. So for a compressor, that would mean a compressor operator. Somebody probably is going to need to do the training to be able to understand how to work with a compressor. And on the other side, if you want that the operator is checking for the amount of carbon monoxide, then you probably need a carbon monoxide analyzer as well. So that's where you get to that equipment and that training. And then ask yourself, what if there is a problem? What if there is too many carbon monoxide in that cylinder? What will you be doing now? And then ask yourself if you need any evaluation or checklists or logs that you, for example, can say that these are the cylinders that I filled, or the client came into my shop and I filled this cylinder on this day, and all of a sudden the next morning you have a problem with carbon monoxide. I can look at my log. That client came. Let's get in contact with that client because he might have a contaminated cylinder as well. So these are all the things you have to think about when making a procedure or an emergency plan. That doesn't change that much. And then you come up actually with your plan, and that plan needs to be implemented. So if you have, as a dive business operator or a dive business manager or an owner, and you want to implement a procedure, then this is what you will do. And at the end, it needs to be implemented. Your staff needs to be informed. And then you need to start monitoring it. And when you monitor it, then you might need to have some corrective actions. Maybe you wrote a plan, and then the guy, that instructor or dive master on board of that boat tells you, well, what you wrote in the plan here is not really feasible here. Why? It should be probably be done better that way, and then you can make the needed changes if needed. Now, if you look at those areas of interest in a dive center, and that's what we actually did in the HIRA program, is we divided it in, for example, staff health and safety issue, client health and safety issue, staff training and certification, the pool area, training room, dive shop, dive and boat operation, compressor and tank filling area, storage equipment area, the small instrument workshop, vehicle safety, because sometimes people use cars to get clients from one part to the other as well, and then some travel and health advice. These are the areas in a dive center that we are going to analyze in that HIRA program. And we made a manual for this. We sliced that dive center in those different areas. And for each of those areas, we identified the possible hazards and the risks, or what it could lead to if not managed well. And this book is available. This is an available manual that we have. But even with that available manual, we have seen that a lot of dive operators, they get stuck. They don't know how to analyze the hazard in their operation or how to make those plans. Let's take a look and see here on the slide if you can see something that can be improved. And if I look at the first picture on my left side, then I think that we all agree that it's not the most safest way of using a ladder. It's not. It's tricky. If the ladder start moving to the left, they will probably not be able to keep that guy. He would just, the whole construction might fall. Even that other guy might be stuck under the ladder when it falls. It's not the safest issue, but I think it's relatively easy to see here that there is a problem. And on the picture at the left, on the right, sorry, it's the guy does wear protection equipment. He wears a gas mask, unfortunately, not in the right way. And this is another thing that obviously this picture is it's a joke. It's very clear that there is a problem over there. I cannot imagine that this person really put it on his face like that. But how many people would actually use equipment or hearing protection in the correct way? For example, hearing protection in the correct way. So this is something that we need to check as well. It needs to be a part of how we mitigate our risks. Going to diving, when you look at these pictures, oh, that's not clear anymore. That ladder and that gas mask was easy. Here, if we need to identify risks, it's getting a little bit more tricky. And in reality, it would almost be impossible to analyze a risk only by looking at one picture. We need to have a good idea how the operation works to be able to quantify a risk. If I look at the picture at the right side on the top, I can see it looks quite okay over there. I see that first aid box there, which is nice. I can also see that the cylinders are protected against falling. I mean, it doesn't look bad at all. If I look at the picture at the left side at the boat, I can see again here that those cylinders on the bench, they are kind of protected against falling, which is good. I see those green cylinders, that is probably medical oxygen. They are there, and I see they are protected. And then I see those nitrogen cylinders, nitrox, sorry, cylinders a little bit more to the left. We are not protected, but hey, if the boat is moving and the cylinders there are standing up, sooner or later it will fall. I need to understand how this the operator actually works, but that would be something that I say I'd like to look into that. And if I look at the picture below, I can see it's a kind of it's a small dive operation. It doesn't look very bad. I can see even a fire extinguisher behind that door. I see a compressor there, cylinders next to it, but then I also see those BCDs on top of the cylinders. The cylinders are not protected against falling. And if I have to get that BCD, I'm probably going to have to bend over the cylinders with the risk of the cylinders falling as well. So if I look at an area like this, these are things I would like to investigate a little bit more. I like to know more about how does it work? Where is the risk over here? If I look at boat operations and think about the hazards, what would be checking if just by doing boat operation? It depends from region to region. In the pictures that I can see here, it's at least the one on below, it's maybe no Thailand, whatever. It might be a remote location, the one on top there as well. It's not very clear for me on the picture. I need to understand the dive operator in order to actually tell them if there is a problem. But the nice thing on the picture on the top right is I can see they are carrying an oxygen cylinder. I'm not able to see that on the others. I probably need to have to ask them or need to go on board in order to check if they have the needed equipment. But then when I look at the picture below, I hope this is taken just before they are going to get into the water, because they're all wearing their dive suits and it might be a little bit hot, so they might get some hyperthermia as well. So I like to understand how they operate on a boat like that. So what are their procedures? What do they tell the clients? Where they put the cylinders? How they protect them from hyperthermia? And if I look at the last picture at the left side, I can see some people, they're just putting their dive suit only at the until their waist. I don't know if it's a client or if it's actually a staff member. But if I look at this picture, I would like to understand how they operate and if they are aware also, for example, especially with the staff members, well, not that your client shouldn't be shouldn't be aware of it, but especially with staff members, that are they aware of sunburn and ultraviolet radiation? And only a few weeks ago, there was an accident in somewhere in the Caribbean of a dive center bringing a group of 4 divers to a dive site with car. It was a shore dive, and the dive guide discovered that I think he forgot his fins or something, so he had to drive back to the dive center. Took him 20 minutes to go and like 20 minutes to come back. He was gone for about 40 minutes or so, and people were just waiting for them over there. All the material was still in the trunk, but they had their snorkel and their fins and their mask, and they were snorkeling on the reef without protection. And one of them had a heat stroke, for example, because nobody ever even imagined that amount of sun for 40 minutes in the water could lead to a heat stroke. So all the kind of things I would like to know if I see this kind of dive operations. Do we see any hazards or problems on this picture? Well, there's no obvious hazard or problem. I can see that is a very luxury boat on the top left, and the one on the on the top right seems to be rather luxury as well. The one on the bottom is a little bit older. In reality, when I look at these pictures, I know that 2 of these boats, they're completely burned out. And the boat that you see on the bottom is the boat that I was referring to on the first slides, where 34 people died and they all like suffocated or burned to death, but I believe they're all suffocated from the gas from the it came from the fire, but they were dead before they're actually burnt. So there is a lot of things that I would like to know when I look at boats, and I'm thinking about escape routes and about fire safety. Do they have fire extinguishers? Do they have any kind of fire alarms, for example? Do they have a night watch when the people are diving with them? Because these are typical boats for like dive cruises or liveaboards. Classrooms, what problem can we have in a classroom? Well, if your classroom is on the second floor, now there is a fire in the hall, how you get out of the classroom might be something you want to think about. But also, do students have a good vision on the screen? Can they see? And if I look at the picture at the right, the table is very long, and it might be so this television is not all that big. It might be so that if I'm sitting at the end of this table, I will not be able to read what's on the screen. And if I'm doing a course and I can't read what's on the screen, maybe I'm not understanding everything, and that might pose a risk for later. On the other pictures, well, on every picture, I'd like to understand also the chairs. Are they ergonomically okay? And what's the amount of light in that room? Is that enough? Or is this not enough? Is there all hazards that I would like to investigate a little bit more? Because if you see on that picture below, it seems to be a very big room, you know, the picture that you see on the bottom with the guy in front of this big slide screen. But I also see that there's a lot of light coming in, so maybe at certain times of the day it would be very difficult for people to read the screen again and so on. Again, here, this is the last picture, I believe, of dive operators. And again, it's very difficult by only looking at pictures to understand what's going on. I need to see more pictures. I would need to see maybe a video, or better even be there to understand all the risks involved. But if I look at the one at the left side, then I kind of gives me the impression that it's kind of neat. It's very well organized. I can see again a fire extinguisher over there. And if I go and look at the one at the right, that I do have some questions. And the questions, they would concern the amount of light, because I can see there are some dark areas. And then I see that your people are just sitting there in that shop. Is it a shop? Probably it looks more like a big garage. Look at the amount of cabling that is there hanging on the wall. What is happening there? Do they have a workshop? Where is that workshop? There's people with drinks in their hand. So I'd like to understand more about how these people are working in that areas. And this is not something that everybody knows how to do, or you know where to start. So I have some questions, but you don't have to answer them because the mics are all out, but it's just a reflection. Just think if you would know the answer to these questions. So how many of you would be able to explain exactly what is immersion pulmonary edema and how to react when this is happening? And how many of you know the difference between ultraviolet A and ultraviolet B rays? And if this is this something that we should be worried about, and why? Should we worry or not worried about them? How many noise is actually allowed in a dive center or during, for example, cylinder filling? And how many devices can you charge into one charging socket? And when should you charge them? And how much light do you need in a workshop? Do you need more light in a workshop than in a classroom, or is it the opposite? How does it work? And which hazard can be present in a classroom other than the light or the chairs? What other hazards can we have in that classroom? How do you perform a risk assessment, and how do you make your emergency action plan or your standard operational procedures? And who would make it? Would you be able to make it? And what should you consider when you dive with children? So these are just 10 questions, and you can think about them and see if you know the answer and if you feel comfortable with the answers that you have in your mind. Or maybe you see, well, I don't really know and nobody actually told me, and I think it's like that, but you're not really sure. Now, to mitigate the risk, as I said before, you must understand or you must be able to understand and to identify the hazards and perform that risk assessment, and which is not a standard part of a diving course. Now, the good news is that with experience, it will help you in understanding the risks that are present. But it will take years before you understand the risks, and even accidents might happen before you say, oh, as an accident happened, now I need to make some changes to avoid that accident happening again. But you had to wait until the accident happened, though, which is not the best way forward. Now, again, remember that clients, they expect that the dive operators mitigate their risk and work in a safe way. But practically, this is rather problematic because there are many aspects actually that one have to take into account, and finding a person who's able to take care of it can be rather challenging, or have the time to do it can be rather challenging. So what you need in reality, or what we would need in reality, is a diving professional who have elevated their knowledge when it comes to diving safety and safety skills. Somebody who have learned to identify and assist in mitigating technical and operational risks in the complete range of dive-related activities. You probably need a person that is able to perform that hazard identification and risk assessment and to improve on the standards in dive operations. You need an individual whose role is an extension actually of the mission of making diving safer, preventing injuries from happening, and who has that optimal level of competence, but also confidence to perform this function well. And this person is what we call a diving safety officer or a dive safety officer, a person who's able to do that, who has the right amount, or received the right amount of training to be able to make dive operations safer, and not only what's happening into the water, but also what's happening outside. So we have a 40-hour diving safety officer course, or dive safety officer course. And in this course, you will learn many things. And I have a list there, and I can go through it very fast. I'm not going to explain piece by piece, or we would be here for the next hour. So we would the course would include the role of a diving safety officer, then how and why you should perform that risk assessment and risk mitigation, how to make procedures. It will teach you about sustainable business planning, fire safety awareness. It includes an introduction to hyperbaric or recompression chambers. It will have lectures on ecological sustainability, oxygen cleaning, pressure regulators, lubricants and sealants, gas compressors and compressed air for scuba diving and the related problems or risks, electrical systems. It will include lighting ergonomics, noise ergonomics, maintenance issues, how to make an emergency plan, sun exposure and ultraviolet radiation, occupational health and safety issues, so taking care of your staff. It includes diving medical aspects. It will talk about the older divers, children and divers, lost divers, propeller injuries, uncommon problems that a lot of people do not take into consideration, disinfection, equipment accidents, or problems with equipment that lead to accidents. It includes the right of refusal. So when you can say to a client, I'm sorry, I cannot take you out diving, briefings and debriefing. How do they really need to be done? What should be included, and not only focused on a course, but generic. Safety improvement manual or program, the safety manual, safety and health signs that might be obliged to use in dive centers, which we hardly ever see. How you do that, HIRA, mitigation in the workplace. Then we dividing that dive center into these different slices. So we will look more in detail in in-water classroom and dive shop operations, rental equipment, storage and dive shops, non-boat diving operation, boat diving operations, traveler health and safety, staff and customer health and safety, and then at the end there is also some practicals, because then the candidate of this course would actually have to perform a risk assessment in a dive center, and he will have to also pass a theoretical exam, but the course will end with some practical sessions. Now, the course that we are organizing at the moment, so we have two options. You have a full immersion 6-day DSO course in presence, so you have to travel somewhere and be there in a classroom for a week, and then it's a 5-day course, and then there's 1 or 2 days, depends a bit from how days are organized, in which we have some practical appliances. And the second option is actually the one that we are going to organize this year, is an online option, where you have a 40-hour program, but it's run over 2-month periods. The next one is focused on Friday evenings and Saturday mornings, a few hours, in which several people will present all the lectures that you've just saw. And then it will end with a practical session, and you can the students of this course, the participants to this course, they can choose between a live session, so that we organize with the students to go somewhere and to perform that practical risk assessment in a dive center, or we can organize, and this for the first time, organize it completely online with the use of videos and video connections with the students directly. We have some different lectures on the course. One of them is Francois Berman. You might know them. He's like the father of the dance HIRA program, and he's from South Africa. And then we have other people who are very specialized in safety, or very specialized in one part of running dive centers. We have Chris Demetrio, he's from Cyprus, Alan Holst from Denmark, we have Manuel Preto from Portugal, we have Rob Simons from Holland, and then you got myself as well, and we will be the one who are lecturing on this course. Now, the first course, the spring one, it will start in a few weeks on the 3rd of May, and it will run, the theoreticals will run until the 28th of June. And then the practicals, we will agree with the students one by one when the practicals will be done. And another course that we are planning, and the dates might change a little bit, but not much, is another course that starts on the 8th of November and would stop on the 11th of January, and it is the same online course. So this brings me to the end of the presentation, and let's see if there are any questions.
So, Guy, thank you very much. While we wait for some of the questions to come in, I have 1 or 2 just based on some folks that have asked me how things work. So it's great that you informed us on how the online sessions will work and so forth, but bearing in mind that quite often, if you are a dive center owner, manager, or involved as a dive professional, you might need to be preparing things, say, on a Friday night for diving activities or courses that will take place then on the Saturday morning. And that's then obviously when the lectures will take place. Are the lectures then recorded? How do you access those? And, just what kind of platform do you use and so forth? Are you able to let us know about that?
Yes, so we have a program, of course, we'll share the course program with all the participants, so they know exactly on what evening, from what time till what time, on what morning, from what hour to what hour we have lectures. But all the lectures, we record them as well, and we are using a platform which is called GoToWebinar. So all the students, they would have access to the platform. They will not be able to download the presentation, but they would be able to look at the presentation if they were not able to be present during that specific lesson.
Okay, and then having access to, let's say, you'll obviously get a login to the GoToWebinar. Will those presentations then be there for just a certain period, or will they be there for as long as you have access to the platform?
No, they will be there for a certain period, but students will
Okay.
receive, obviously, you will receive a lot of documents that will just, I'm not saying that would be exactly the same as we say it during the presentation, but if there is a presentation, for example, on fire safety or on hyperbaric chambers, then we will also obviously make documents available in English that will explain what has been said on the slides as well.
Yes, yes. And then one or two other questions with regards to the certification and so forth. Is there an end date, or is it just you have it and then, you sort it, similar to,
Yeah.
you get a driver's license, as long as you keep it up, then you're fine. How does that work?
Yeah, so there is not really an expiration date on the certification, but we would like, obviously, that people remain informed. And this means that we will, if there are new things, we will share those documents with them. So they need to keep in contact with them. They need to read the documents, and we will also make some additional webinars for them, which might be obligatory to follow once every 2 years.
Okay.
But then again, we can record it. So if you can't make it, you can still, in your own time, you can see it, and you don't have to pay for that. It's just made available. But this is just to keep you informed, because things will developing. And what wasn't an issue a few years ago, for example, batteries, is a big issue at today. So that's why we need to make sure that all our diving safety or dive safety officers, they are kept involved. But there is no end date on a certification. You do not need to redo a course after like a year or 2 years or 5 years.
Yeah, so basically the program that you're offering provides the foundation of the DSO and HIRA, but then there'll be ongoing, it's called education from the HIRA or the DSO team and the lecturers, providing regular sort of updates in the form of articles, or every now and again maybe sort of like a get together online or something like that to discuss new or relevant things. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. Then just about the practical side. So for the folks that are on the webinar and you might not be aware, Guy is coming out to South Africa sort of mid-July, and he's going to come out for the folks that are participating in this online program who then want to do the practical. He'll be available and he's going to be in Cape Town, and we will visit different dive centers and facilities that are keen to participate, and then we can complete that practical. However, if you can't make it, then we have the online process, as you said, Guy. And I know you said it's with videos and all that, but I know we've got 2 youngsters that are from South Africa, but they're participating, although they're somewhere in the Middle East. Now, I assume that if you say video, it would be handy to be at a diving facility, and I assume what you're going to do is have tasks for them to complete, showcase what they're doing. And I assume, I don't know, are there any sort of exams or like an assessment you need to submit, or even a higher report yourself, so that it's assessed by the panel of DSO lecturers?
Okay, so so there are some, I wouldn't call them exams because it sounds very negative, exams, but there are some answers that need to be questions that need to be answered during the at the end of the presentations, and at the end of all the academic session. These are multiple choice questions, and they refer to everything which has been seen in the program. It doesn't require a huge amount of material to study. Okay, the most important things will be asked, and we will focus on it during the presentations. But of course, it would be great if you read also the documents. When it comes to the practical part, we have a guide that will help you in performing a hazard identification and risk assessment. and you will need to perform a hazard identification risk assessment in 1 or 2 areas of a dive center. And we might be able to provide you with a video of an area in a dive center that you're going to have to perform the hazard identification or risk assessment on. Not that you have to go to a dive center and then film it yourself. We provide you with a video, you do it, and we will play the role of the business owner. And so we are waiting for you to ask the right questions of us. We will answer, and we'll see if you like our answers or not. Then for whatever area that you have made in your in that fictional dive center or in that video dive center that we showed you, you have to make a report of it. But to make the report is rather simple because we provide the defaults. We will provide you a document. You just have to fill in the missing parts there.
All right, well, thank you for that. I see there are a couple of questions. One of them was Abigail just asking about the practicals. Is it only going to be in Cape Town? So for the folks that haven't seen my response, for the July date, yes, it'll be there. But then the Dan SA team will do follow-ups throughout the year for folks that participate in other parts of our region, not just South Africa. We've got Mozambique, if we have any of those folks, Mauritius, Seychelles, Tanzania, and so forth. So we'll make a plan then to get those sorted, unless you want to opt for the online program or sessions. So that's also there. We've got one from Zhao. Is the program just for Southern Africa, or will it be available for Europe? So as far as I know, Guy, this program is available worldwide, but I guess there's a more European and Southern Africa people attending, although I don't know. I think Franco might be getting some of the folks from the States involved as well. I don't know if you can answer that.
Yeah, so the program that we are using here in Europe is extremely similar to the program that is used in the States. But the course that we are organizing
Hey there, brother.
now,
My name is Steve.
the program that we are organizing here in Europe is open only for people who are living in the European region or living in the South African region. It will not be open from people from America. If Americans would like to do the DSO course, they will need to participate in the American course when that is organized. So we separate. It's the other DANs are responsible for this course in all parts of the world.
All right, great. Folks, I don't know if you have any more questions. Guy, over and above the practical session you're going to do, obviously we've got plans when you come out to introduce the concepts of HIRA and the DSO program to other facilities and dive professionals by offering, I guess, talks and little workshops at different venues within the Cape Town or Greater Cape Town area. So, close to the time, I'll obviously get some marketing material out and let people know, but by no means does that mirror what the online program is, which is a full-blown course and stuff. The idea there is then to sort of give the folks that don't attend this first online program the opportunity to get a better grip on what the programs are about, and then to hopefully join programs in the future that Guy and the rest of the panel offer. Guy, I don't know, it doesn't seem like we have any more questions. Do you have any closing remarks or something else to add? If not, then I guess that's good night.
No, not really something to add. Just, what we have, it's sometimes we are used to work in a certain way, and by working in a certain way, and we are used to working and nothing ever happens, we are like kind of bit changing the basics that we are doing. So sometimes we are no longer actually respecting the standards or what should be done, what is actually, we call it the normalization of deviance, where we start making shortcuts. And we're not doing it the way it should be done. And then all of a sudden, after 10 or 15 years, we have a problem. We get into an accident, and then we are surprised that the accident happened. So unfortunately, one of the things that we are fighting with today is to create that culture of safety, to make the professionals aware of where there are hazards and where there are risks. And a diving safety officer, he might work in his own center, but a diving safety officer might also be asked from another center to write documents or to make his dive operation safer. So at the end of the day, also it will depend from the owner of a dive center if he wants to invest in safety or not. And with invest, I'm not talking about purchasing things, but just investing in time in making his operation safer. And as a diving or a dive safety officer, you have the possibility to offer your knowledge to different dive centers, not only to your own operation. So that's it.
Yes. All right. So I better understand Zhao's question earlier. He also just followed up just to ask, so is the program being offered in Europe similar to the one that's being offered here? And the question, or the dates at least rather. So the dates are the same for the Europeans as well as the Southern Africa region. Is that correct, Guy?
Yeah, that's the same course. We are the students on that online course that we are doing, they will be from South Africa and Europe. You will meet each other in a virtual classroom, and it's exactly the same course.
Okay. So Guy, obviously we've got a couple of folks that have already registered and paid for the program after the last webinar we had. I've passed on those details to you. I assume what then happens is you put them into your system and they'll start receiving confirmation and login details and stuff like that from you. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. So at the moment, it is planned that everybody who has subscribed to the course in the last 2 weeks, because they will receive a communication tomorrow with a detailed plan and detailed information. The credentials to enter into that webinar, that will be given more closer to the start date of the course.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So, well, from my side, Guy, thank you very much. And for everybody that attended, great. For some of the folks that arrived a little bit late, the webinar is recorded. So as far as I know, Teams will then, send that link through, but I will have your details and I'll get a copy of that and send the link or make a plan to get it to you. So from my side, thank you. I hope you're looking forward to the program. I am. And see you next time. Thank you. Good night and have a good evening.
Bye-bye.